We're back on the Alex Jones Show. I'm Paul Joseph Watson. Filling in for Alex, riding shotgun is David Knight. Obviously, we're talking about the latest Ebola outbreak news. We've got Rick Perry, Governor Rick Perry, coming up with a press conference very shortly. We're asking him, and we're asking our listeners, to contact the White House and urge them to block all incoming flights from West Africa, at least for a period of time, because that's what several other top airlines have done over the past few weeks, and yet the United States failed to do so. Now we have Ebola arriving from Liberia. CNBC reports Dow dives 200 points as global worries hit stocks. One of those worries is identified as this Ebola outbreak. So, you know, we've got CDC saying this is nothing whatsoever to worry about. It's an isolated case, yet it's already wiped 200 points off stocks, off the Dow Jones as of this morning. Also on Infowars.com, we've got a big story. Former FDA top scientist says more will be infected now that Ebola is in Texas. And this is Dr. Jesse L. Goodman, currently formerly with the Food and Drug Administration. He said the public should not panic, although he said the government should prepare for the worst. It's quite appropriate to be concerned on many fronts, Goodman said, according to the Washington Examiner. I think we're ready to go to this press conference with Rick Perry. Is that correct? Let's go ahead.
And Superintendent Miles and our local, our state, and our federal partners in keeping this contained. This is a disease that is not airborne and is substantially more difficult to contract than the common cold. We have experts here with us today who will be talking to you in a minute about the precautions that you may want to take. The medical community of North Texas, along with officials from the state and federal government, have been working together to take every step available and necessary to care for this patient's health and to ensure the safety and welfare of our citizens. There are few places in the world better equipped to meet the challenge that is posed in this case. Texas is one of only 13 states certified by the CDC to conduct diagnostic Ebola testing. And we have the healthcare professionals and the institutions that are second to none. Public should have every confidence that the highly trained professionals involved here will succeed in this very important mission. Public health investigators from Dallas County and from the Texas Department of State Health Services are working to identify, to locate, and monitor the health of all of those who have come into close contact with the patient. The highly qualified men and women of Texas Health Presbyterian are doing everything in their power to deliver the very best care for this patient. They have been and they will continue to be in close contact with federal, state, and local officials to ensure the public safety. This case is serious. Rest assured that our system is working as it should. Professionals on every level of the chain of command know what to do to minimize this potential risk to the people of Texas and of this country, for that matter. I'd like to ask Dr. David Lakey, he is the head of our state health services, to come and share with you the efforts that are ongoing as we address this issue. David? Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Lakey. I'm the Commissioner of the Texas Department of State Health Services, and I really appreciate you being here today. I want to echo several of the comments that were made by the governor. First, our thoughts and prayers are really with the family. They were notified about their loved one having Ebola yesterday. Obviously, is a scary diagnosis, and so our thoughts and prayers are with them right now, and also with the treatment team, those individuals in the healthcare that are caring for the individual right now. Since the outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, Texas has been taking steps to make sure that we are prepared for an event like this. A lot of education has taken place. A lot of protocols have been put in place. We've developed the ability to test for this virus since August, and to be able to do that in our laboratory. And that preparedness is not just taking place at the level. Preparedness was taking place here at the local level in this hospital. They take it really seriously. They've been educating their staff. They've been putting their own protocols in place so that they were ready to care for an individual that this individual, any individual that showed up with Ebola. So we've been on the lookout for this. I had the opportunity today to spend time with the team and talk to the management team and hear how they have been preparing for a long time for this event. And then I had the opportunity to talk to the infection control practitioners and actually go onto the ward and see firsthand the work that they're doing. And I want to let you know, they're doing a great job. They're providing compassionate care. They have a committed staff that are providing top-notch care, and are doing that in a safe environment. They have a whole ward that's dedicated to the care of this individual. They have a whole team of, again, professionals that are very competent caring for this individual and are doing it, as I noted, in a very safe, compassionate environment, providing excellent care. Now, obviously, this disease is scary to a large number of individuals, but I think some of the points that Dr. Frieden emphasized yesterday need to be
I don't think we're going to get an explanation as to why they sent him home.
One of those statements that he said, and I want to reiterate, is that people cannot transmit this disease until they have symptoms. Okay, and so individuals that do not have symptoms are not going to transmit.
Let's jump in there. Let's try and go back to that conference. If they take questions, obviously we want to try and get one or two in. David, the spokesman there that came on after Perry was basically saying that they put protocols in place. They were preparing for this for a long time, and yet they completely botched the response. They sent this Ebola victim home.
That's the thing. They want to tell us, they want to argue that we shouldn't worry because they are hyper competent, and yet they won't even address why they just diagnosed him with some antibiotics and a cold or whatever the diagnosis was, and sent him back home for another 2 days to expose family members and other people in the community, and then the ambulance workers as well. They now have, I believe it's the latest news that I saw, it was 12 to 18 people are being monitored. They've tested the ambulance crew. They say that they have tested negative for Ebola, but they're still keeping them isolated. But it doesn't inspire confidence when they won't address their failings. And we've seen this from Business Insider. They put out an article with 3 points saying why we shouldn't panic. And they say, well, they know exactly how to control the virus. They know what precautions to be taken to treat the virus. And yet, why do we have over 200 doctors and nurses that have died in Africa treating this if they completely know the protocols to keep this contained? That makes me concerned that they don't understand fully the methods of the means of transmission. They also want to say that it's not very contagious, that doesn't spread through the air. Perry started out by saying this is harder to catch than a common cold. Well, you know, you can catch a cold from inhaling what somebody sneezes out, and certainly if this is transmitted by bodily fluids, if somebody sneezes with Ebola, you know, or you touch anything where their bodily fluids were, where they're bleeding, you're going to get it. So it is very contagious, and it can be spread through the air, as you've pointed out many times. I've had animal studies that show that certain strains would transmit through the air. So we're not really certain about that. When I look at the number of doctors and nurses that have died, I wonder if maybe that might be part of the reason that they don't fully credit the means of transmission.
And these are health professionals that take precautions to the nth degree, and hundreds of them have died in West Africa. We're told that it could only be transmitted via bodily fluids. But we've also got the CDC advising airlines to take precautions so as not to allow the airborne spread of the virus. So we know that they are concerned about this, despite the fact that Perry almost immediately in that press conference said that this is not airborne. Another concern, David, of course, is the fact that this ambulance in which this Ebola victim was transported to the hospital was in use for 2 days afterwards, before they identified him, before they confirmed him and isolated him as an Ebola sufferer. Let's go back briefly to this press conference to see if we're going to get any actual answers.
Their marching orders and understand the importance of that good collaboration, that good partnering from the state right through our federal partners with the CDC. So we'll open it up to those of you in the media for any questions, and individuals on the podium here can respond. I beg your pardon? Sorry.
Can't hear the question.
Mark, why don't you?
We're categorizing his condition as serious but stable.
Yeah, we're not sure. We can't hear with this press conference. We can't hear what the questions that people are asking in the audience, and we're not getting much in terms.
Was in place for Ebola in this hospital for several weeks, and Dr. Ed Goodman, to my right, had led the implementation of that. That checklist was utilized by the nurse who did ask that question. That nurse was part of a care team, and it was a complex care team taking care of him in the emergency department.
I think somebody asked if they
regretfully, that information was not fully communicated throughout the full team. And as a result, the full import of that information wasn't factored into the clinical decision-making. The overall clinical presentation was not typical at that time yet for Ebola. So as the team assessed him, they felt clinically it was a low-grade common viral disease. That was the presentation.
He's talking about why they failed to diagnose it the first time the guy came in. Did they ask him where he was coming from?
He volunteered that he had traveled from Africa in response to the nurse operating the checklist and asking that question.
That differs from what we were told before, because they said he was sent home.
I can't answer that question because that's one piece of information that would be factored into the entire clinical picture. The clinicians did not factor it in, so it was not part of their decision making.
I think that was a question from Joe, but I didn't quite get it.
Yeah, Biggs was asking if the flights are going to be shut down from West Africa. I don't think
that's a question
that's
really not in my domain.
It's not in his domain. He's a CDC.
So Biggs just asked if the flights were going to be shut down, and he basically avoided the question.
Investigated, so we are investigating it. I can't give you specific information, but we will look very carefully at that.
Would you not call that a misstep? Would you not?
So now one of the media representatives said that it was a misstep, so they're confronting him on the mistake that led to this guy being able to walk back around Dallas for a couple of days.
That was present, so that all the information wasn't present as they made their clinical decision.
All the information wasn't present. That's your point when you diagnose yourself.
That information was not obtained when the patient was in the emergency room.
Do you know that
It was not obtained because they failed to obtain it.
I'm Dr. Mark Lester, and I'm an executive vice president with Texas Health Resources. I'm the zone clinical leader for the Southeast Zone in Texas Health Resources.
But it seems the media are asking real questions, which is good. This guy's getting quite a grilling.
Just hard for us to
remember, it's unprotected exposure to the bodily fluid that constitutes an exposure. And so very carefully, and together with the CDC, we're investigating how many people that might be and how they might be monitored if that's so.
Does that mean nothing?
As I said, we're investigating that right now.
People in the Liberian community are saying they want to know who he's had contact with, so these people can go and get tested to see if they have it, so they can isolate it, keep it from spreading. They won't tell anybody anything about this guy, whether he's a citizen, anything about him. They won't put this information out there so people can take precautions themselves.
And so far, no comments on the possible second case, which we talked about earlier. One of the Health and Human Services Department officials said that there was a possible second Ebola case. Where at the press conference outside Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, Rick Perry just spoke, a CDC official just spoke, and Joe Biggs managed to get a question in there asking if the flights would be shut down into the United States from West Africa. Air France, British Airways, United Arab Emirates, Emirates Airlines have done that. The CDC official, David, kind of sidestepped the question. He said it wasn't his domain, which is why, we're encouraging people to call the White House and have this, get behind this campaign to shut down the flights, because several other countries have done it. It seems like a reasonable precaution to take. It's not as if there is a huge volume of air traffic from Liberia, for example. I noticed in the Daily Mail article there were just a few flights a week going into Britain, so I can't imagine it's too many more going into the United States. So it's not as if this would be a huge economic impact on the economy if these flights were cancelled. It seems like a sensible precaution to take, David.
Well, as I mentioned when I first came in at the top of the hour, some of the stations were on a news break at that time. This is something that they've been doing for dogs coming into the United Kingdom for a very, very long time, for over a century. They just stopped it in 2012. They would quarantine any animals that were being brought into the UK for 6 months to test them to see if they were positive for rabies or a variety of other diseases. They changed that in 2012, but they still hold animals that are coming in from preferred areas like the EU and the United States. They still hold them for 21 days. They hold animals coming in from elsewhere. They hold them still for 3 months. Why are we more concerned about the health of dogs than we are about the health of Americans or people here? Clearly, they're, in my opinion, they don't want to get this thing under control or not make any efforts to try to do that until it gets out of hand. And then they will get very heavy-handed. Then they will bring in martial law. Then they'll bring in mandatory quarantines. That's what they've been preparing for. They haven't been preparing to contain a disease. They've been preparing for martial law. And this is one more way that they could bring this in. So it looks to me that it is something more than just vast incompetence. And clearly the kind of dodging that we've seen them say that we should not worry about this because they fully understand it, and yet they don't have a cure for it. They don't know how it's transmitted, because we've had over 200 doctors and nurses die in Africa from this treatment. And then they want to tell us how professional they are, and yet they can't or won't explain why they didn't diagnose this guy when he first presented himself to the hospital, but rather sent him home and then picked him up a couple of days later with an ambulance.
And I mean, I go back to this comparison again and again with the swine flu outbreak back in 2009. The hysteria that preceded that, which was being generated, whipped up by the media and by officials, was intense. They were talking about troops on the streets in numerous countries across the world. Of course, it never happened. What did happen was the mass generation of profits from the sale of a swine flu vaccine, which was basically unnecessary for huge numbers of populations of countries around the world. Basically, you were only at risk of getting swine flu, of dying from swine flu, if you were either elderly, young, or sick. So that left out the vast majority of the population. But they did get these swine flu vaccines, which created millions of profits for these pharmaceutical companies who had the vaccine lined up before the hysteria, before the panic. Of course, in the case of Ebola, we've got discussion of the ZMapp drug in development. We've got discussion of patents for Ebola viruses, for vaccines, but nothing really firmly established. So in the absence of that financial motive, it seems that the CDC at the moment is trying to downplay the concerns. Of course, our concerns, which we voiced on numerous occasions, are the fact that they have measures in place, the CDC, to quarantine, quote, well persons who do not show symptoms of any respiratory disease. And of course, Obama signed an executive order back at the end of July where he said that basically any American could be detained, could be quarantined if they show any sign of respiratory illness. So we've got the architecture of medical martial law targeting people not even showing symptoms of Ebola. Seems to be directed more against the American people amongst establishing coalescing power within the medical establishment. And yet they're caught with their pants down with this one Ebola victim who walks into a hospital in Dallas after having arrived in Dallas from Liberia, is asked 0 questions about his travel history, given antibiotics, and sent home. David, final comments on that before the break.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing to me. That's what I would expect them, if they were going to be candid and honest and forthcoming, I would expect them to address that incompetence up front. Instead, all they did was they gave us happy news about how they've been training for this, they're prepared for this, and we have the best medical facilities anywhere on the planet here in Texas, and never addressed that, and then dodged the question, essentially saying, well, that information wasn't obtained, that's why he was sent home. It's like, that's your job to obtain the information. So if they don't understand that's their job, if they don't do their job, why should we be reassured about their competence? But you mentioned the ZMapp virus vaccine. That's something that everybody heard about when those first two came back that were with Samaritan's Purse, Dr. Brantley and the other lady to Emory University. They recovered. However, after that, they gave other people the ZMapp virus. They gave 2 people the ZMapp virus who then subsequently died. So they're essentially 2 and 2. There have been 3 other people who were treated with the ZMapp vaccine. They are still being treated, so we don't know the outcome of that. But if you look at those numbers, that's not substantially better in terms of effectiveness than the general population numbers in Liberia, where it's so high. They're having 53% casualties so far, but they say of the people that are not yet dead, they believe that those casualty rates are going to go to 70% effectively, because that's why it's staying down at 50%, because the people who have contracted it and are being treated have not yet died, but they expect them to. So it doesn't look at this point like it's essentially much better than not being treated at all. And of course, they exhausted their supply after 7 treatments.
And we've got your calls coming up after the break on Ebola. Gerald Salente in the next hour. David Knight riding shotgun. I'm Paul Joseph Watson, hosting the Alex Jones Show today. Infowars.com. Stay right there.
Alex Jones here to break down some exciting developments in the area of research concerning supplemental iodine. It's nothing less than phenomenal. I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. And I used some of the mainline iodine supplements and they upset my stomach and I had some issues with it. Until I discovered a product being developed by Dr. Group, who I was already interviewing as an expert on my radio show, and I began taking the product before he actually rolled it out. You now know it as Survival Shield True Nascent Iodine that your body can really absorb. Then, about a year ago, he said, listen, if you think this is powerful, I'm going to come out with rare earth, deep earth crystals that are incredibly powerful that no one else has as a source for their iodine from between 7,000 and 12,000 feet, literally drilled out of the ground. You put it on a hot plate and it turns into the pure gas. No one else has 99.99% pure iodine. And the results that I personally have had have been life-changing. I was over 270 pounds. And with the iodine, exercise, and better diet, I have lost now more than 50 pounds total, and I'm continuing to lose the weight. I have more energy, my libido, all this crap came out of my skin. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. This is innovating. This is trailblazing. And the best part is it helps fund Infowars.com, the radio show, the TV show, the whole media operation promoting true libertarian ideas. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox special at InfoWarsLife.com.